So let's turn to the honours. Let's turn to the honours system. How do the judging of honours currently work? Because I think that's a good place to start for most people, because it is a sort of mysterious, shadowy world, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and as I understand it, haven't been given an honour myself, but as I understand it, there's a whole series of very well-intentioned committees manned by well-intentioned, clever people who sort of go sift through applications and sift through lists of names, and have in the end to make the judgment of Solomon, saying that Mariella Frostrup ranks ahead of John Penrose in the queue for a CB
Surely not.
or OBE or whatever. Indeed, so and they do their very, very best. But what I'm suggesting is that because it's all done behind closed doors, and because the criteria aren't published, and we don't know who's been nominated, and we don't know why one person got an OBE and another person got a knighthood, it's all a bit opaque. It's all feels a bit like a sort of an old pals club, and the suspicion is, an often voiced suspicion by other people, that if you don't know people in government and you don't do a job which brings you into contact with Westminster very much, then you're kind of on the back foot, and we may be missing an awful lot of very, very deserving people who may be really amazingly good at what they do, but just get overlooked, not because anyone's being awful about it, but just simply because they don't come to the notice of the system, because it isn't fully transparent, and because people can't see how it works. It just means people feel disconnected from it.
Yeah. Do you think, John, people do get overlooked because they don't have the right connections?
Well, it's noticeable that there's a heavy preponderance. A lot of people who work in and around Whitehall and in and around Westminster on the list. Now, they may be absolutely thoroughly deserving, but there's many fewer people who work away from Westminster, don't work in government circles, if I can put them that way. And shouldn't we be trying to recognise if someone's started a company in the north of England or in Scotland and has grown it to employ thousands of people and create loads of wealth for your and my pension fund and everything else, shouldn't we be recognising them too? And there's not as many of them in the list as you might think. So the suspicion is certainly that some people are being missed out just because they don't know the right people. And there's always, of course, the concern that some people get given awards for the wrong reasons, because they've given money to a political party, be it Labour, be it Conservative, and that shouldn't count either. So yeah. I think a dose of sunshine and sunlight and transparency wouldn't hurt. And if we've got nothing to hide, let's not hide it.
Interestingly, Simon Jenkins, a one-time editor of The Times and now Guardian columnist, wrote a column the other day where he described things like the way in which honours are handed out as the sort of shadowy corruption that's become this country's defining feature. Do you think that's a fair accusation?
I strongly doubt that, because I think that the people who run these committees will almost certainly be trying to do their level best, but we don't necessarily know who all of them are, and so I think a bit of sunshine and a bit of sunlight would dispel any concerns about that, even if they turn out to be completely unfounded. And equally importantly, it would mean that we'd have a system which everyone can be sure that the nation's top talent is being properly rewarded. And if you want to have a modern 21st century Britain that's a genuinely meritocratic society where the best and the brightest get recognised for what they're doing and what they've achieved, then it just feels to me like this is the time to stop it being a bit of an old pals network and make it as clear and as transparent as we can.
Yeah, then you probably don't have a House of Lords then, do you, if you want it to be fully meritocratic?
I voted for them to become fully elected several times already, so yes, I'm with you on that, but it's probably a different conversation.
Indeed. Do you know, I mentioned two young men who I'm sure would be uncontroversially very much on people's lists in terms of the sort of people who should be awarded some kind of honour, the two young men who attempted to save a stranger's life on a London bridge. Do you know what has happened to Joaquim's award? Why didn't he or Jimmy feature on this year's list?
I don't know what's happened to their award, but they're a very good example. I think incidentally that awards for bravery and valour are probably one of the most difficult things to sort of try and reduce to a system. It's just inevitably going to be something where you'll find some really, by definition, extraordinary circumstances and people doing impossible to predict things. So it's probably one of the most difficult areas to make really genuinely meritocratic. But I think we should try, because people will be asking questions about these two gentlemen and saying, well, it may be that they're still in the system and that they'll get one next time. I don't know, but people will be asking questions, and it should be something where everyone can say, look, whether you got one or you didn't, the list of people who have got one, everyone should be really clear that they are amongst the best and the brightest and the most brave, or whatever it is, and therefore no one can really. We should be in a position where no one can criticise the choices that have been made.
So how would the sort of points-based system that you're suggesting work?
Well, if you think about the annual publication of the Sunday Times Rich List, which didn't exist until a couple of decades ago, and they basically sort of got a list of how much people own and have earned and that sort of stuff, and that they do it for money. I'm just saying, let's try and do something which is equally transparent and have a UK talent list. And we'll say, look, if you have, for example, if you've run one of the nation's top schools and grown it and improved its Ofsted rating, so it went from being a good school to being an excellent school, and you doubled it in size and you run it for 20 years, that should mean that you will be one of the top education lists. Ditto, you'd have a way of spotting the top vets and the top accountants and the top doctors, and you basically just have publish the criteria for saying what good looks like, and therefore what the top talent would be in each walk of life around the country. And if you or a member of your family or your boss or whoever it might be, if any of your listeners felt that somebody deserved it, they could plug that person's achievements into the system and say, well, actually, they've got enough points to get an OBE, or here's how much more they'd have to do in order to qualify for a CBE instead. But it would make it a thoroughly transparent process. It would mean that anybody could spot whether or not they were eligible, or whether or not someone they knew were eligible. And it would mean they'd know what more they'd have to do, whether they lived in the north of England or in and around Whitehall. It wouldn't matter. Everybody would be eligible, and everybody would have an equal chance of being able to spot whether or not somebody was deserving.
Well, it all sounds very kumbaya and a vast improvement, perhaps putting it all online. But if the honours system changed, would the Conservative Party's way of being funded have to change?
Oh, no, not at all. One of the core points about this is that you might want to give points for people who've donated to charities. So philanthropists of one kind or another. If someone makes a huge fortune and gives large chunks of it away to good causes, then you'd certainly want to recognise that. But I don't think that you would want to recognise money given to political parties.
Exactly, hence my suggestion.
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I don't come into contact with party funding very much, but from what I understand, most of the people who give money to any political party, it doesn't matter if it's the Conservatives or the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or anyone else, often give a great deal more money to charitable causes as well. And the money they give to political parties is a relatively small fraction in many cases. So I don't think that the two systems need to, either of them need to change, but we should only be recognising the one which is giving to charitable good causes rather than to politics.
How hopeful are you that your proposals are going to fall on listening ears?
Well, this is the first time I've proposed it, so we're at an early stage now. The fact that people are interested in it, and people like yourself have asked me to talk about it on your radio show, I just think shows that there's a feeling in the country at the moment. There's an appetite and a feeling in the country that actually it's time for an update. I mean, it's all a bit old-fashioned. It's all a bit last century as it currently stands. Why don't we try and have a modernised 21st century, properly meritocratic system that's ready for the next generation?
And on that note, thank you very much, Conservative MP John Penrose, Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare. Thank you very much for joining me.